a lot of people need that jump start, right? And a lot of people won't make the leap because they can't see the revenue. And when I can show them they can make six figures in 6 months, that's usually enough to get them to quit their job and get going on it, or to do whatever they're going to do to get going so that they can start that entrepreneurial life.
Get ready to build, protect, and sell your expertise online with the Online Genius Podcast. You'll laugh. We hope you won't cry, but you'll always be informed and prepared so you can have the success you want. Here's your host, Bobby Klink.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Online Genius Podcast. I am really excited about this episode because we're going to be talking about an exciting topic, and that is, how do you go from 0 to 6 figures in revenue in 6 months? I think many entrepreneurs are confused about where to start and how to put together an initial plan, and as a result, they end up being overwhelmed and not knowing what to do, and they can sit there with paralysis by analysis. And I understand from my own personal experience that often the first 6 months, the beginning when you're starting to build your revenue, build your business up, is the hardest part. And so that's why I'm excited that we're going to have this conversation today. And luckily, you're not going to be listening to me, a lawyer, tell you all about that. Instead, today's guest expert is Ron Douglas. He is a pretty inspiring guy who has overcome quite a bit of adversity in his lifetime, which I suspect we're going to get into at least a bit of that during the show, in addition to getting his advice for you about how to go from 0 to 6 figures. Ron is a father of 8 who happens to be a serial entrepreneur, speaker, coach, and investor. He has amazing experience to share with business people. Built and sold multiple businesses, from a car restoration business to a wildlife company. And he's built multiple businesses to over $1 million in sales within 12 months, which is quite an impressive accomplishment in my book. He starred in a Discovery Channel show called Blue Collar Backers, where he helped upstart businesses get started and grow. He coaches business owners to help them break through and to build the businesses they want. Welcome to the Online Genius Podcast, Ron.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, one of the questions I always like to ask my guests is, did you always know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur?
No, actually, I had no idea what an entrepreneur was. I grew up in a military family, so I just knew I didn't fit. I didn't fit the mold, and I didn't fit what my dad wanted me to do, or anybody else for that matter. Because when you're when your dad's in the military, you're around everybody who's government employees, and so for them it was go to work for the government, 20 years, retire. That was just that's what you do. And so I just never fit the mold. But I didn't quite understand what an entrepreneur was, and I didn't know. I thought only rich people had businesses. So I guess the short answer is no, I didn't.
So I have to ask. So was your dad's vision for you that you would work for the government for 20 years? Is that kind of what he thought you would do? Yeah.
Actually, I did. I joined the Army when I was 18. And right before I was supposed to report for basic, I rolled my car in a street race and broke my back, and I was paralyzed from the waist down.
Yeah, that's part of your inspiring story. So, tell me about what did it take for you to get from that point of being paralyzed from the waist down to where you are today as a serial entrepreneur?
Oh, man, what a long and crazy road that is. I'll try to give you the bird's eye view here. But, basically I went from, paralyzed at 18. I started getting feeling back in my legs, and I realized I was going to be able to walk again with a lot of therapy. So I just didn't quit. And I knew that there was a guy named Napoleon Hill. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Napoleon Hill, but he says that you can succeed 90% of the time if you just don't quit. And so I thought, well, 90% odds is better than any grade I ever got in high school. I went ahead and just didn't quit and got through that. And, luckily I was 18. I bounced back pretty good. I was able to recover from that. And I passed my physical less than a year later before I was able to join I couldn't join the Army at that point. So I joined the prison system of Texas and became a prison guard. And so I did that instead.
I'm actually originally from Texas. So where were you in Texas when you were a prison guard?
I started at Fort Hood, where my dad was stationed, and so he that's where he retired, is out of Fort Hood, Texas. And so we lived in Copperas Cove, if you're familiar with that area. And then my first job was in Roche Sharon, Texas. And so that's where I went and worked at my first unit was there. And then I went to Kennedy, Texas. So I just went around opening up super farms, and then a year later I became head of the riot team for the southern region of Texas. So that was pretty cool.
Wow.
I got to work on the riot team, and then a year later I became in charge of the riot team for that area. And then I got stationed in Huntsville, worked at death row for a while. That gave me an interesting perspective on life. And then that's where, it was right before I was stationed in Huntsville is where I met my first entrepreneur.
As I understand your story, what happened there is you basically had someone encourage you to start, I think it was to start restoring cars. You were doing that on the side while you were still a prison guard. Is that kind of how you got started as an entrepreneur?
Yep, that's exactly how I got started. And it wasn't very long. So I was stationed in Kennedy at the Supermax farm there, and I had just gotten married. And my wife made a mistake in the checkbook, bless her heart. And instead of $25 till the end of the month, I had 25 cents. And it wasn't near enough money to pay for gas to get back and forth to work. And so on the way to work, was a wrecking yard. And I went in there and I asked the guy there, the owner's name was Alan Brown, still good friends to this day. And I asked him if there was any way that I could, work for cash. And he gave me a job cutting, in the Texas heat, cutting gas tanks out of old crushed cars that he was crushing.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was a long, miserable day or week, I guess. I did it for about a week. And then I asked if I could take him to lunch and pick his brain on business. And that's how that all started. Thank goodness he paid for lunch, though, because I was too paying for it.
So, I think there's a kernel of really important knowledge there. So I'm guessing that lunch and picking his brain was important in you developing as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. So that week, as I was sitting there, the one thing I noticed, I guess, and nobody else really picked up on, because everybody's, it's funny because I just went back there and visited him about a year ago, and half the people that were working for him then are still working for him. They're just fatter and older, but yeah, they're still there. But the one thing I picked up on was, man, he owns all these cars free and clear. He owns that shop free and clear. He owns the house up on the hill free and clear. Every car he drives, he owns. Every car that's parked out there for sale, he owns. And he didn't owe anybody nothing. And man, I thought, man, that is something. And I said, to me, that was the world. I was just like, I was making $1,000 a month at the time as a prison guard. And so to me, that was just everything. And so I asked him if there was any way I could pick his brain.
Yeah. I've found in my life that as an entrepreneur that working with mentors and, with people who can advise you can be some of the most valuable time you can spend. Even if
absolutely,
even if you have to buy their lunch, it's generally worth it because people, even if they're theoretically not, someone who's more advanced than you, often they can see things in your business or in your life that you can't see. Has that been something that you've found during your life as an entrepreneur more generally?
Absolutely. Every business, and I'll tell you, and this is true fact. Every business that I've ever started, I had no clue how that business started. Like the wildlife company. I had no clue about wildlife. I didn't know anything about wildlife. But what I did is I went and I found somebody that did and took him to lunch and picked his brain. And I did the same thing with every business I've ever had. I've had movie theaters, I've had barbershops, and every time I've done a business, I just go and I find somebody that's doing it and I pick their brain. Sometimes 2 or 3 people.
Wow. Well, so let me transition from that because, I understand at least that most of what you do now, you speak and do things like that, but you coach other business owners. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah. Yep.
And a big part of that is this concept of helping business owners kind of figure out how to get to 6 figures within 6 months. Is that a lot of what you do these days?
Yeah. A lot of people need that jump start, right? And a lot of people won't make the leap because they can't see the revenue. And then when I can show them they can make 6 figures in 6 months, that's usually enough to get them to quit their job and get going on it, or to do whatever they're going to do to get going in that direction so that they can, start that entrepreneurial life.
Yeah. And so what is the advice? Is there kind of a first step that you find generally everybody needs to take to try to get themselves over that hurdle and get towards the 6 figures in 6 months?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I tell everybody there's nothing to it but to do it. And I tell that to everybody. so many people sit there and overanalyze. And so I literally will write it on a napkin. I'll blueprint, if I take somebody to lunch or whatever and we sit down and we blueprint it, I'll bust out a napkin or a piece of paper, scratch piece of paper, and I make 6 blocks. And I write 6 squares and I write 1 through 6. And then I start at number 6. Okay, in 6 months, what does your life look like? How much money are you making? Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so 6 figures. Let's start with that. Okay, so we're making $100,000 a year. Okay, great. All right, it's $100,000. All right, what kind of business is it? Let's just say it's selling cars. Okay, so you're flipping cars. Okay, so you need to be, making a profit of, let's say, $1,000, $1,500 a car. You need to be making, X amount of cars per month. Okay, so you need to be selling at least 20 cars a month. Okay, blah, blah, blah. And so I put all that in month 6. Okay. And once you have your goals, and a lot of people don't even realize they haven't defined it. Yeah, I want to drive to New York over that way, but I'm not sure where or how to get there. You know what I mean? It's just I want to go that way. Yeah, I want to make 6 figures, or I'd love to have a car business, but they really don't have the details figured out, right? They don't know what they're going to be making or how they're going to be doing it. And so once we have that done in month 6, then we work it backwards. Okay, I open up month 1 through 5. Okay, so obviously you're going to need a location. Okay, so let's find that. Well, let's figure that out in month 1. You're going to need employees and some sales staff. Let's say you need at least 3 employees. Somebody answered the phone, 2 people out on the, selling cars. Okay, so then you need to have at least 2 salespeople hired by month 4 so that you can train them for month 5. And so they're doing rocking by month 6. Okay, so you write in month 4, have 2 salesmen hired. The secretary, you need a secretary right away so she can handle all the books and stuff. So let's put that in month 1, hire a secretary. Okay, you know what I mean? And so then I just start breaking everything down. And when you're done, you basically got your roadmap to 6 figures. I mean, you know exactly what you need to do in month 1, month 2, month 3, 4, 5, and 6.
So it sounds like, again, that this is, like you said, it's largely just about doing it. It's about helping people to visualize what they want and then break that down into kind of the pieces of what it's going to take to get there.
Yep.
Given that that's what you do, it's not surprising that you mentioned Napoleon Hill earlier, given his book. I mean, he definitely talks about things like that and writing things down and, and having a plan. So, I guess what I would say is for someone who is listening to this, who is thinking about maybe trying to make the jump, and they're thinking about doing an online business, what is something they could do this week or every day for 5 minutes that will help them get to the point of having this plan for themselves?
Journal.
Okay.
Every day. Journal every day.
And what do you do in a journal? How do you do that? Because I'll be honest with you.
I journal differently than everybody else.
Okay. Well, look, I'll be honest with you. I'm looking forward to hearing this because, look, I have a morning routine and journaling is part of it, but I have to admit it's the one that I have the most trouble with and that I most often skip. So I want to hear, what is it that you do in journaling? How do you journal and how does it help you and your business?
Okay. So most people journal about what they've done. I switch that around. I journal about what I'm going to do.
Okay.
So basically when you sit down that day, and this is how I start with anything, any idea I've ever had. Like, for instance, I had the idea 3 years ago that I wanted to be on TV teaching people how to do business, right? And I actually showed that to the producer in my journal from like 3 years before. And this is what I did is I started writing. Yeah, I would love to reach an audience of 100,000 people, teaching them how to do this. And I keep asking myself why, right? And so as I'm writing this, I'm asking myself why. And so you start journaling about what you want to do. Okay, I want to start a business. I want to start an online business. Why? Because, I hate my job and I want more security for my family. Why? So that I can go on vacations and spend more time with my wife. Why? So that I can have a happier family. And, does that make sense? And so I start journaling about that and I start asking myself why. And then I start journaling about what it looks like. And I get down to the details. Yes, I'm going to be driving this vehicle. I'm going to be making this much money. This is what my house looks like. And when I say this is what my house looks like, I go into detail. When I walk in the door, just to the right is going to be my office, so that when people come and visit me, they can walk right in and go right to the office, and we can sit down in my office and brainstorm. And then I would like my bedroom close to my office so that I can go back and forth when I need to. And basically I really get into detail, right? And so here's what happens. And the reason why I do this is because there's something special, something magical that happens when you put pen to paper. And I'm not talking about typing your journal. I'm talking about writing it with an old-fashioned pen. Everybody laughs at me because they want to see my journal, and I pull out my journal and they laugh at me because they expected more. It's just those 99-cent spiral notebooks that my wife gets when school supplies are on sale, right? I mean, it's just, that's all it is. It's nothing fancy. Everybody expected leather-bound journals and, fancy. No, it's just complete spiral notebooks. And then all I do is I just sit there and I start writing. But what happens, and I can't explain exactly why this happens, but your mind unlocks its vision for what you're going to do. And so day 1, day 2, day 3, you might be writing 5, 10, 15 minutes, and then all of a sudden something will happen and you'll write 15 pages in 30 minutes. And it's just like, whoa, and your mind is just going like crazy, and it's just telling you, and you're just writing it down. This is my vision. This is what it's going to look like, and blah, blah, blah. And there you go. You've got your blueprint.
Wow. So I guess here's my question. So do you put a limit on it on a daily basis, or do you just write until you're done?
Yeah, I just write until I'm done. But okay. It's usually pretty short, unless I'm really seeking some answers. And if I'm having problems with somebody or something in my business, I'll journal about that. I'll focus on that. Today, I really need to fix, this problem with Tom. Perhaps maybe I'll give Tom a call and we'll go to lunch because, I don't feel like I owe him this much on this bill, and this bill is ridiculously too high. But let's look at it from Tom's point of view. Tom did this much work, and I'll be right. I'll write all this out. And as I'm writing it, things unlock, and your mind starts unlocking some of these magical things that people talk about, and you'll start creating stuff, and it's so funny how things unlock when you journal, and you journal properly journaling about the future, not about the past.
Well, so I love a lot of what you said in there, and I think one of the key lessons, and there's a theme that I'm hearing come out throughout your advice generally, and it's, you don't need fancy tools. You don't need any, great technology, just simple, just keep it simple and take action. That sounds like kind of the advice that you give people. And it sounds like it's pretty good advice from my perspective.
I keep everything simple because I'll tell you why. People try to complicate things. A guy starts a business, right? Let's just say he wants to start an online business, all right? Yeah, I need a printer. I need a computer. I need a phone. All right, so this guy spends 2 weeks researching the best phone and the best computer, and that's all gibberish, man. That's a bunch of bull crap, man. No, you need a sale. That's what you need. Go out there and show me that you can sell this product, and then we'll talk about the phone and the computer and the laptop and all the stuff you need. But until you've sold something, you ain't got a business.
Yeah. I think I understand the perspective of the people who spend all that time doing that, because it's easy. And I find myself, when I get worried about things, it's easy to just start doing work and just spend time doing things, because that way, you don't have to think about whatever you really need to be worrying about. You can just be busy. And I think, what your advice there is great is, look, make a sale or do something to move your business forward rather than worrying about the little details that don't matter.
Exactly. None of that matters at the end of the day. If you've got to send an email to FedEx to have them print something out for you because you ain't got a freaking printer, then so be it. But make that sale. Sell that $1,500 or $2,000, whatever it is. Make that sale and then run to FedEx, and you'll be smiling the whole way to go to FedEx, and then you go buy your printer.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I mean, I always like to try to get one nugget. And so what I would ask is, what is the one piece of advice? If you could only tell aspiring entrepreneurs one thing, what would it be and why?
Probably the best piece of advice I can give somebody is to find a mentor that is successful. And I'm not talking about don't go to college and get a business degree from somebody who's never ran a business before. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if you really want to start a restaurant and get your butt over and start working at a restaurant. It amazes me. I'll give you an example. This guy wanted to come to me, and he had the business plan all laid out. He wanted to start a burrito company, and he had all the ingredients figured out. He knew exactly how much he was going to be making off of every burrito. And I said, have you ever ran a burrito company? He goes, no. And he goes, yeah, they don't pay any, they pay $8 an hour to assemble burritos. I was like, so what? I was like, go and work for a burrito company for 1 month and then come back to me. He came back to me and he said the same thing that I've heard hundreds of times. I am so glad I did that. I am so glad I did that. I hate the burrito business. And I asked him, I said, why? He's like, you smell like eggs and bacon all day. You wake up and he goes, I didn't realize, you got to wake up at 3:00 in the morning to start making the breakfast burritos so that they're ready by 6:00 in the morning when people start showing up. Anyway, he hated everything there was about the burrito business. And he goes, I am so glad that you made me go and start, go work for somebody that was doing it, because he goes, he was ready to invest $55,000 in starting a burrito business.
Wow. Sounds like it's a good thing that he found a mentor who actually asked him some questions and made him think about it.
Yep. So find a mentor that's actually doing what you want and go do it.
Ron, I love the advice generally you've given. I think the themes I'm hearing are, get a mentor and then keep it simple and start taking action. And I think that's advice that every entrepreneur could use. So I want to thank you for being on the show, but let me ask you, where can listeners get in touch with you if they want to, maybe hire you or just find your message?
The fastest way is there's two ways, facebook.com/Ron Douglas. Or you can go to rondouglas.me, rondouglas.me. And on there's a little button there. You can click to download the book that talks about 6 figures in 6 months and how to create the blueprint. And I'm getting ready to throw up some videos. So by the time this airs, you'll have some videos on the website and you'll be able to see exactly how I do this for every business. And so you can recreate that blueprint and have some marching orders to go forward.
Okay. Ron, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's been great. And listeners, stick around for a quick legal lesson where I'll give you a little bit of advice on how to protect the online business that you're building.
And now for today's legal lesson.
Yay! Wow. Ron is a really inspiring guy. He has a great story and he's achieved a lot. And he gave some really great advice during his interview about how you can get started and how you can go from nothing to a business that you can be proud of in a matter of 6 months. Now, the lesson I want to give you today, the legal lesson, is related to the concept of when you're first starting. But I'm not going to latch on to anything specific he said. Instead, I want to address what you need to be thinking about from a legal perspective when you're first starting your business. Now, the idea for this lesson comes from what I have found in interviewing and in surveying people on my list and potential clients to help me understand what their needs are. And what I've found is that many entrepreneurs are struggling because they don't know what they need to do. It's kind of the unknown unknowns. They're not sure what they need to be thinking about, what they need to be taking care of, etc. So I wanted to take this time and in this lesson, go over kind of a quick overview of the issues that just about every online entrepreneur needs to be thinking about. Now, your business, there may be other things, but these are the issues that you need to think about no matter what if you're an online entrepreneur. So that's what we're going to do today. And I'm going to talk about a number of them. And so let's get started. The first thing I want you to be thinking about, or that you need to think about, is should you form some kind of corporate entity? And by corporate entity here, I'm talking an LLC or a partnership or anything like that. Now, there are a couple of different rules that would apply here. Number one, if you are in business with someone else and a partner or you're sharing ownership, then you definitely should form a corporate entity, because the fact is that in that case, you have something that's been implied by law at a basic level, so you should get an actual filing in place. But more importantly, now you probably have heard about the recent tax law that was passed here in the United States. And part of what that did was give some tax benefits for pass-through corporations. So that would apply to an LLC or a partnership or any kind of legal entity where you as the owner have to report the profits of that entity on your personal taxes. So that's going to apply across the board to LLCs and to partnerships. And the advantage you get is that you actually get to deduct a portion of those profits before you have to pay tax on them. Now I'm not going to get into the details there. You'll have to work with your accountant. And it's not like you get to deduct 20% of all the revenue or all that, because you still have to pay yourself, and there are going to be some kind of regulations around that. But there are definitely some tax benefits. There are also some benefits for protecting your personal assets if you form a corporate entity. So if you have an LLC or an LLP, which is a limited liability partnership, for example, and something happens through the business, you won't necessarily get sued. There are some other benefits, but you really ought to be thinking about that. So you need to do some research and figure out, should you form a corporate entity? And if so, which kind? So that's the first thing you need to think about. The next issue that you need to think about is kind of a broad area that I call written agreements. And the basic point of this is start to condition yourself to believe that you need every important agreement in your business to be in writing. So that means if you have an agreement with anybody that is important for you to be able to enforce, it needs to be in writing. So what are some of these? Number one, a client agreement. If you are doing any one-on-one engagements with clients, you need a written agreement. So if you're a consultant, a coach, anything like that, you need a client agreement. Second, if you have a partnership or a corporation, you need to have basic documentation about that. So that kind of is a basic that comes with the prior issue. You also need to have what are called IP transfer agreements or intellectual property transfer agreements. If you have anyone who helps you in any way, shape, or form with anything creative, with anything of your content, etc., you need to have an agreement from that person transferring all the rights in that to you or your business. So those are kind of some of the quick ones. But again, you need to just start saying, hey, if I have an agreement, it needs to be in writing, period, full stop, and start applying that to your business. The next issue, the third issue that I want you to think about, are naming rights issues. So what this has to do with is trademark law and figuring out, can you legally use your name? Now, I've gone over this in some prior lessons, but there's two parts. First, you need to do a due diligence to make sure that whatever name you choose, you can legally use. And again, if you're just starting, that's the perfect time to do it. So it really fits well with Ron's lesson. Now, the other part, though, is kind of the advance, which is figure out, should you go through the process of getting a trademark for your name? And this is an issue that you have to make a cost-benefit analysis, but generally if it's kind of your core business name or your core product name, and you see yourself using that name for 5 years, 10 years, some long period, you should really consider going through the process and paying, it'll be $500-$600 total probably to get your trademark. So it's probably worth doing. Now, the next issue you need to think about is confidentiality issues. And this has to do with protecting your secret sauce, making sure that any proprietary information you have stays that way. And there's a couple of different components here. One, you ought to have a confidentiality policy within your business, and this is going to do things like govern how you store information electronically, physically, etc. So you ought to have that in place. And then you need to have confidentiality agreements in place. Before you share any confidential information with anyone, you should have a written agreement with that person saying that they will not use that confidential information for any purpose other than whatever you're giving them that information for. So again, if it's an employee, it's for their work for you. If it's a business partner, it's to explore the business opportunity, etc. But you need to have those agreements in place. So that's confidentiality. Then the next thing that you need to think about and have some knowledge about is copyright law. And you need to have a plan in place to make sure that you are not stepping on a legal landmine by infringing someone else's copyright rights. Now, copyright applies to anything that's creative, so think images, movies, music, written works, etc. And the important thing is you need to understand what is the law, what can you do, and what are you not able to do, so that you don't do things like accidentally use someone's image without permission and end up getting sued. This is an area where a lot of people fall down. Every podcast I appear on as a guest, it seems to come up, the issue of, hey, yeah, I got a letter because I used an image without permission. So you need to have a plan to avoid that. Make sure that you're not doing that in your business to avoid a problem. Now, the next piece is related, and this has to do with trade secrets. So trade secrets, this is confidentiality again. But on this part, what I want you to think about is have a plan to make sure that you're not stepping on other people's trade secrets. And this is largely going to come up in the context of if you hire a new employee. So if you hire an employee from a competitor, you need to make sure that that employee isn't bringing confidential information with them and using it for your business. So the classic example of this would be if you brought a salesperson on board, you need to make sure that they didn't bring their customer list from your competitor and aren't using that, assuming that there are limits on that. So you need to have a plan in place to figure out how you're going to deal with that. And then the last piece that you need to worry about, and again, this is a broad list that everybody needs to worry about, are the necessary policies and terms for your website. So there's two pieces here. One, there's a terms of use or terms of service. And then the second one is the privacy policy. The terms of use is generally, think of it as essentially the contract between you and your website visitors. Again, for most casual visitors, it's not going to be a big deal. But for people who are going to buy from you, that becomes the contract. So that's where you put the terms for anyone who's going to buy an information product from your website or enroll in a course or do any of these other things. That's where you put the terms, or basically the essential agreement. And if you have a money back guarantee, that's where you put that information. There's a lot of stuff you need to include in there, but you need to go out, find the right terms, make sure they're done for your website. Now, the second piece is the privacy policy. And this is, quite honestly, if you're ever going to advertise on a lot of the social media networks, and I think even Google AdWords, you have to have a privacy policy on your website. They're not going to let you put an ad up if you don't. And what a privacy policy does is it tells people what you are going to do with the information. First, what information you collect, and then what you're going to do with it. And so, again, this is a kind of a dense document, but you need to go out and make sure you have a privacy policy on your website. So look, that's the quick overview. There's no way that I could give you, all of the ins and outs of doing all these things on a podcast, but that should give you kind of a checklist in your mind of saying, here are the things I need to do. So again, first, decide on a corporate entity if you're going to do it. Second, get written agreements in place for all of your important agreements. Third, consider naming rights issues and trademark issues. Fourth, we talked about getting confidentiality issues in place. Then you need to have a copyright plan. Then you need a trade secrets plan, or a plan to avoid any trade secrets issues. And then finally, I mentioned that you need to get website terms of use and privacy policies in place for your business. So if you do those and treat that as a checklist, you should be in good shape, and just go out and make sure you've taken care of those issues. That's it for today's lesson. Tune in next week for another great episode. Again, I hope you've subscribed, given us a rating and review on iTunes or wherever you're downloading this. That really will help people to get it. And again, make sure to check out the free cheat sheet I've got about the 4 common mistakes that you'll hear always on the outro of what you can get, and you can get it for free and make sure that you're not making those mistakes in your business. Until next time, I'm Bobby Klink signing off.
Thanks for listening. And remember to visit mistakes.youronlinegenius.com to get your essential guide to the 4 legal mistakes that can doom your business and how to avoid them. Join us next week for another episode to expand your online genius and your success.